This is Radio Ukraine International with the weekly program Doing Business, hosted by Rodion Zhiznievsky and produced by Konstantin Lavrentyuk. Doing Business covers current economic developments in and concerning Ukraine, gives topical information and immediate and longer-term economic forecasts. It is what we think might give you food for thought and help you see Ukraine from the economic angle. Oleg Vyshniakov is a Ukrainian businessman and a public figure in office since November 2014 at the Ukrainian Honorary Consul of the State of Israel in the city of Lviv in western Ukraine. Oleg Vyshniakov owns a number of commercial and entertainment centers, several supermarket chains, and business centers in Ukraine, Latvia, Georgia, and Poland. In November 2014, Vishnyakov was appointed as the Ukrainian Honorary Consul of the State of Israel in western Ukraine, and in May 2015, the Honorary Israeli Consulate was founded in the city of Lviv. Vishnyakov participates in the life of the Jewish communities in Lviv and organizes support programs and humanitarian aids to the needy. In addition, Vishnyakov initiates various activities to strengthen the historical and cultural heritage of the Ukrainian Jews and organizes cooperation between the Jewish Agency and the Jewish communities in Ukraine. The memorial question is, of course, the prior one. Recently, there was Babin Yar 80th anniversary, and you are a member of the Public Council of the Memorial Center. Could you tell us more about your participation in this council and your presence in the past events dedicated to this anniversary?
My participation is a little formal. I don't take part straightly. It could be only some consulting, and you know story about this Babiyar, that now the main participation it's people from Russia, you know about. I mean Alpha Group, Friedman, and now there are some people who don't take part in this project, for example, OCDC. And of course, they are immediately against it. Because of they don't take part, and they motivated it that we can't cooperate with Russian people, but that Russian people invest money here. They don't took money from there, yeah? And I know that their budget is about $200 million and more than that. It's not all. They are going to attract some donors from different countries, for example, from America, from Canada, from Israel. And this budget could increase much more than $200,000. Of course, Ukraine doesn't have any money like this. So, my opinion, it is very good movement, and it's very important to do there something great. It's very important for all people here, all people all over the world, because you know about this strategy. And I personally support it.
Apart from the famous memorial center in Babin Yar, there are also other memorials in Ukraine. For example, the one in Boyarka, to the reconstruction and opening of which you are directly involved. Could you please tell us more about this memorial in Boyarka?
I took part there. And I visited there, and more than that, I even a little financed there, not big money. But we can't even compare that memorial in Boyarka and what will be in Babiyar. I think that in Babiyar now there are some great monuments, even now. There is a new synagogue, and it depends about money and about wishes. I hope that in some time, in some year, in Babiyar will be something like Yad Vashem.
That what you said is really important, that importance for the public to know about the things that happened in Babin Yar.
Absolutely, because, for example, even my children, some of them, especially younger, absolutely don't know about it. By the way, I have 6 children, and the oldest one know about it. I spoke with them about it. And, for example, we drove near Babiyar, and my wife told them that it will be good to go there to the excursion. And the youngest, my son, he asked, what does it mean, Babiyar? He absolutely doesn't know.
So yes. Especially for the young generation, that's what you said. That's really important to share all these things, terrible things that happened. And by the way, you said that
it's not just limited with the different objects that are already constructed on the territory of Babyn Yar. It's going to be a huge project. Yes, probably
Absolutely.
one of the biggest in Europe.
It will continue a lot of years. My assessment, minimum 5 years or maybe more, maybe 10 years. It's a big job. I think that people who started to do it, I mean investors, I'm grateful to them for it because I am Jew. And it's very important to know about it, not only Jew, Ukraine, Russian, and different nationality.
Thank you for your answer. My question is more about Ukraine-Israel relations. Recently, there was the change of the government in Israel. So how has the change of government in Israel affected our relations?
Now there are very good relations and close cooperation, and in various fields have been established between Ukraine and Israel. At the end of December, we will celebrate 30 years of the establishment of diplomatic relations between the countries. First of all, it's political cooperation. Ukraine and Israel have a big cooperation in the United Nations. They go together. On October 5th, Kyiv hosted an official meeting between President of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky, and President of State of Israel, Yitzhak Herzog. It's important to note that Yitzhak Herzog makes this first state visit as President of Israel to the Ukraine. It's very important, very symbolic. By the way, you know that community of people who were from Ukraine in Israel are more than 500,000 people.
Wow,
Yes.
So many people in this group.
Yes, and all Russian-speaking population in Israel is approximately 1,200,000. Practically half. Meeting between two presidents went very well, and the parties discussed many issues related to Ukrainian-Israel relations. That relation between countries will only get better. Your question, what changed with new government? No problem. Now everything is good.
We always had and still have good relations between Ukraine and Israel. If we move directly to the business, in what areas of our life are Israel ready to invest in?
You know that Israel is a country of technologies. It means that Israeli investors are ready to invest in new technologies, innovation. Israel is expert in cybersecurity. It means that investors are ready to invest in cybersecurity. Israel is expert of healthcare, construction, building, pharmaceuticals, and of course in agriculture. You know that Israel made oasis in desert.
You're listening to Radio Ukraine's weekly program, Doing Business.
If we talk about key areas that could be interesting for Israeli investors to invest in Ukraine, what would you highlight more? Is it more IT or pharmaceutical sphere?
The main direct Israel investments in the Ukraine economy over the past year are real estate operations. A lot of people invest money here to create some, for example, flat or apartment, and they rent it here because they can earn here around 10% per year. In Israel, it's a fantastic result. Real estate, operation, information, and communication are processing industry. More and more Israel IT companies are opening representative offices in Ukraine. Of course, Ukraine would like it could be not outsourcing. It's better that they are real IT companies. But I think most of them, it's outsourcing company. In this year, Ukraine and Israel agreed to join efforts to improve the infrastructure of Uman. Maybe you know about it.
Yes, I've heard about that.
To develop the city and international center of culture there. Because the condition in Uman now is so-so.
By the way, you started talking about Uman as the core of Jewish community in Ukraine, and you said about making infrastructure there in the city. And also we touched upon the topic about investment in Ukraine. But if we talk about the main obstacles, the main limits for Israeli investors, what would you say? Like, what are the things that make this process go not that smooth?
I remember it was February of 2020, visit of Zelensky to Israel.
Right.
And he had a meeting with Israeli businessmen, investors. I was there, and I spoke with Zelensky personally about obstacles. If investor invested some money, he has to be sure this money will be in security. And he must understand that when he invests something in our country, he has all the rights for this investment. And our courts to be transparent. That he has to understand that someone not will take it, investment or his real estate.
You're talking about the corruption level in the country.
Yes, of course. I think that first direction, it's a fight against corruption. Transparent courts, fighting with corruption, it's the main situation here.
Did we make a great progress in fighting with corruption for the last 5-7 years, or we still remain on the same level as it was before?
You see, it's hard to say. I think it's a wave. Sometimes it's successful, sometimes it's not successful. You see, it's very hard. But I am sure that if in Ukraine there isn't any corruption, we don't need any credits.
So we'll get the investments rather than credits.
Yes. You see, we don't need credit. We need investment. Ukraine is a very rich country, but because of corruption, because of different problems, I understand we can't have victory over corruption at once. It's a process. It's hard. And even I don't know what to do exactly.
Probably we should wait more years and do more actions to finally win this corruption stuff. And as you said, it cannot be done at once. It's a long process.
Absolutely.
You're listening to Radio Ukraine's weekly program, Doing Business.
The next my question is about the abolition of duties by Ukraine that should fully happen until 2035. That will provide Israeli investment project implementation go smoothly and in the right way. Could you tell us more about this abolition of duties that is going to be made by our country for international partners and for Israeli partners? How this process works? Tell to our listeners more about it, because not of all the listeners could understand how exactly it works.
It provides the exemption from tax duties on equipment that is imported into Ukraine for the implementation of investment project, as well as exemption from taxation on the profit of investor enterprises. In this way, we stimulate and attract new investors to our country. I remember that law about that zone, it two parts couldn't adopt it 7 or 8
For
years.
7 years?
Yes, it was very hard process. You see, our country changed government, changed ministry, changed chairmen of ministry commission between our country. But now everything okay, it was adopted, include our parliaments, and I hope that it will bring good benefits for both countries.
The next my question, as you said, that situation in Ukraine is not that stable and people are changed. I mean, the ambassadors, the consuls and so on. But still, as we see, there is some interest, and I would say high interest from Israeli part. And especially there is increase in demand for Ukrainian housing. That you mentioned at the beginning of our interview. Could you say about, apart from the IT sphere, where you said that it's needed for the offices, could you say what are the other reasons why residents of Israel buy the property here in Ukraine?
Now there is an increase in demand of Ukraine housing, and the new trends are being recorded, which the developers themselves declare that emergence of Israel funds. They buy apartments in large guarantees, large quantities and at a time. Sometimes this entire floors, sections, building. I told you about it, that Israeli people have big interest for it, because that investments are much more efficiency than in Israel. Typically, these apartments are rented out and managed by specialized funds. You see, funds and companies, there are some companies in Ukraine who run that real estate, especially for Israeli people. They organize service, tenants, or something.
The next topic that I would like to cover is that Israel is well known for its high standard of high quality medicine. I just wonder if there are any common projects in the healthcare sphere and pharmaceutical sphere as well between our countries.
So far, there is only one investment project that we are aware of. However, we can name just a few cases when such projects are actually being implemented. In Israel, investors plan to build a hospital in the Kyiv region. The planned amount of investments in the project has not yet been disclosed, but it is expected that approximately 1.5 hectares of land will be allocated for the construction of the hospital. In general, medicine is a very hard and complicated area and requires big investment. But Israelis are expert in medicine, a lot of tourism to Israel, about it. So I hope that it will be not one project, it will be in the future first requirement, and it's transparent economy and fight with shadow economy. It means that include the situation in medicine.
So the conditions should be created first, and then there will be common initiatives.
Absolutely.
Yeah. For many years, you as an honorary consul have made a lot of efforts to create a free economic zone between Ukraine and Israel. What have you managed to achieve during this time? Could you tell us, could you name the list of the things that have already been done and achieved?
We are in only beginning in this process. Maybe you know about it that a lot of Ukrainian workers now went to Israel to work. It's very good because their salary, we can't even compare with salary here. And they can help their families. I think that it's the main achievement. And now there are a lot of negotiation between different spheres, but I told you that it's real situation.
As well, it is said that you, Oleg Vyshniakov, is the Ukrainian Honorary Consul of the State of Israel in Western Ukraine. But what exact areas does this region include, and why exactly the Western Ukraine?
I will explain you. At first, it is 8 Western regions. Lviv, Chernovtsi, Ivano-Frankovsk, and all that Western region. Why in Western Ukraine? Because I couldn't be honorary consul if in that region there is embassy or consulate. For example, in Kyiv there is embassy, in Kharkiv there is consulate, in Dnipropetrovsk is consulate. It means that now there is only Western Ukraine. It will be a long way to be honorary consul. It took about 2 years. You see, in Israel, bureaucratic machine is much more powerful than in Ukraine. Only in Israel, it took 2 years to do all proper documents and to pass all their commission.
You also mentioned consulate in Lviv, and as far as I know, it's located on Gazovaya Street, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes. I bought building there. I bought building special for Israeli consulate.
Right. And how many people are working there? Is it a big team?
No. There work only 2 people, and we organize there a lot of events, cultural events. It's very important to show Jewish culture even for Ukraine. It's very big job.
Would you say that locals, people who live in Lviv, they became more tolerant to Jewish population?
They are tolerant enough for Jews. You see, it's very important to show, to speak them about Jewish history, Jewish culture. You know that in the Western Ukraine, Chernovtsi, Ivano-Frankovsk, in different cities, before Second World War, half population were Jew. And there are a lot of Jewish tradition there. There are a lot of Jewish culture, Jewish building. It's very interesting.
That's right. And by the way, as far as I know, if I'm not mistaken, again, Gazovaya Street is located on the territory of former ghetto. So probably you chose this place for this purpose. Am I right?
Partly, yes. And you know that in Lviv there was a big tragedy too. There was a concentration camp. So it's a Jewish history, you are right.
Let's stay more on this topic about your consulate in Lviv. What forums and events do you hold in Lviv and other cities that you mentioned before, Chernovtsi, Ivano-Frankivsk, and so on? Could you tell us about the upcoming events? Probably there are some forums for business people, for businessmen.
You see, I organized regular flight from Lviv to Tel Aviv. It was very important for communication and cooperation, even that region with Israel. We organized there some touristic exhibition.
As far as I know, you also helped to launch this direction, this way from Lviv to Tel Aviv, so that it's much easier to do, to implement such tours.
For example, there are some directions. One of them is a touristic direction from Israel to Western Ukraine. Especially in the summer, you know that summer in Israel is very hot. A lot of people want to rest a little from that hot climate and
Conditions.
Yes, and they with pleasure go to Western Ukraine. In Western Ukraine, there are some resorts.
Mountains.
Yes, first situation. Second situation, due to this flight, it's much more very easy to go to Israel, to go back to Ukraine for business people. A lot of relatives, people who live in Israel, live in Western Ukraine. It's very convenient to go there, to go here, to meet their relatives, and it's very pleasant. I was very glad that I could organize that flight. I mentioned that I organized celebration, some Jewish event, and I have special meeting, enough big meeting hall in that my consulate. There could sit more than 100 people, and it's good enough, and it's very useful. We attract there a lot of youth. There are music events, and so on and so forth.
You mentioned youth, like progressive and young people. I have to ask you the following question. Are there any exchange student programs or other youth initiatives between Ukraine and Israel?
I made initiative and I financed and published special book for Lviv universities to study Hebrew. It was my participation in that area. It's very interesting. I was very glad.
Are there any Jewish camps probably for younger kids that like not for students but for pupils?
It's a little different themes. I took some children from Lviv region to Israel, to the camp there. That children whose fathers died, I financed myself that camp for the children, and they could rest. They were in a very good condition in Jerusalem. They could visit very interesting places in Israel. So I was very glad, and my opinion that it was very important.
So kind of social initiative, which is really important. By the way, I also heard of another initiative that during the war in 2015, you organized psychologists for militaries.
Yes, I organized with Embassy of Israel more than 20 sessions. Military psychologists from Israel, they moved in Kyiv and in Lviv. They worked with Ukrainian psychologists, worked with people who was in the East, soldiers or different population who got
psychological injuries, right?
Injuries, yeah. It's very important, and I financed it, and the Israeli government financed it. It's a very good sign. It's a very good close cooperation. And more than that, I took some doctors from Israel, and they teach Ukrainian doctors in Lviv, in Lviv hospital, in different sphere, heart, eyes problem, and different situations.
And one more question that I need to clarify, consulate and embassy. How do you interact and coordinate your actions with the Israeli embassy?
We work with very close cooperation. We try to help each one. Of course, the main area of embassy is political area. My area, it's a cultural, business, science, tourism. So, of course, we very close cooperate.
Basically, that's it. I asked all the questions. It was really informative.
And that was the end of the interview with the Ukrainian Honorary Consul of the State of Israel in Western Ukraine, Oleg Vyshniakov. That was Radio Ukraine's weekly program Doing Business, hosted by Rodion Zhiznievsky and produced by Konstantin Lavrentyuk. Tune in every Wednesday for more.